And thank you for sticking around on the last, I guess, panel.
You can't go anywhere, it's raining anyways.
Yeah, so hang out with us and hear a lot of great things. So I'm very excited today to have a panel of some rock star investors and builders. And really, we want to keep this panel a lot more like an unconference, where we just want to talk about the Web2 and Web3 investing trends in Southeast Asia. And so perhaps to begin, what we'd love to do is probably do a quick round of introductions, but more hone in also on the backgrounds of each panelist we have, and maybe their experiences both within Web2 and Web3. So Ben, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. My name is Ben. I'm the co-founder of Ascend Vietnam Ventures. Before being an investor, I was a founder. Actually, I was a coder. I started coding when I was 13. I even made a PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 game in the mid-90s. But prior to being an investor, I had built a social data analytics company in San Francisco. I raised my A, B, and C rounds from Kleiner Perkins. And it was a very interesting time because there's so much innovation during that time from 2008 to 2014. I think data was everywhere and it was free. I don't know if you guys were still in school back then, but during that time, Facebook had an API called the Open Graph API, where you can download this graph and actually send messages, to your entire graph and use it in other applications. And even Twitter had a conference called Nest. And Nest was a conference that, things like @mentions and retweets and a lot of just concepts came from the community. And what those companies did is that they used these builders and coders like myself to create value, and they ultimately did a rug pull, right? So the idea of Web3 bringing a little bit more ownership, giving more equitable value to the people actually creating this value, it's a great concept. So I'm glad to be here and be part of this panel because, I do think that there's some exciting things happening in that space.
Don?
Hey everyone, my name is Don Fan. I'm the Web3 Business Development Manager at Amazon Web Services. We work with a lot of crypto Web3 startups here in Vietnam. Before that, I did 3 venture-backed startups here in Vietnam. Raising money was really difficult. Ben actually backed one of my startups. Unfortunately, I didn't make him any money. But one of the things I saw
We're
firsthand,
still friends.
Right. Thank you, Ben. One of the things I saw firsthand was just how hard it is to raise money as a startup founder in Vietnam. And I think the boom in ICO, IDO funding has been a really positive trend for Vietnam and has led to a lot of innovation here. And we can talk more about this later on. Jeff?
Yeah. So I actually started my career in the public market side, working at hedge funds, first with Peter Thiel and later with Mike Cagney. And when you do a global macro hedge fund, you're looking all around the world for the best investment opportunities. And eventually, thanks in part to my wife who started Lixibox out here, we ended up in Southeast Asia, where they're the fastest growing economy out here these days. And I spent a bit of time at Founders Fund helping them figure out their Asia strategy, and since then I've been doing a bunch of angel investing in the region, and there's a lot of really great founders, a lot of really great tech talent out here, and I'm not as sold on the Web3 side as most of these people are. I have backed a couple Web3 companies, but that's mostly been because the founder has been really amazing, and I kind of had to,
So, want to bring it into the heart of it, which is venture capital investing in Southeast Asia, right? And I'm curious from all 3 of your perspectives, what has changed in the last 2 to 3 years that perhaps we didn't see in the second half of the 2010 eras? Are there any interesting trends or catalysts that have really brought more funding as well as more venture-backed startups into the region? And we'll go with you, Ben, first.
Well, I think the major thing that happened was blockchain was the first technology where you could be competitive with everyone, right? You weren't at a disadvantage to start building. And for a country like Vietnam that has so many software engineers, that was really exciting to be able to race out the gate without a handicap and to be able to prove themselves. And so, I think this whole entire region has developed pretty interestingly different from each other. Vietnam is a little bit more of Silicon Valley in the sense that the evolution of the ecosystem was driven from, like, the early founders we were invested in were the ones who actually were coding, versus some of the other markets where some of the early founders were maybe from management consulting who had MBAs, and the investors who invested saw that as a way to mitigate some of the risk. These people know how to put on desks to be able to go and hire and manage teams, versus here it was just people creating. And so I think over the last few years that talent and just going beyond creating, now building businesses, has matured quite a bit, and not just Vietnam, but around the region, to enough scale and value creation that, yeah, there's a ton of capital coming in. I think $290 billion is an all-time high in dry powder right now to be deployed. And that's globally, but over here as well, there's a ton of new funds, as well as funds that, like ourselves, we've only deployed maybe less than 10% of our seed fund, so we're looking for projects. And then geopolitical things have happened. I think there's a lot of China brain and capital flight into the region, and so that's going to continue to bring capital over here. So yeah, lots of interesting things, including, you know, new sectors that have just been born overnight, DeFi, from GameFi, NFTs, DAOs, so it's kind of crazy and overwhelming.
Don, I'm curious from your vantage point at AWS, have you seen any catalysts that have really drawn a lot more usage of the platform? Like, how do you think about it from your perspective?
So, you know, Axie Infinity taking off was a seminal thing for us, in that we saw Axie grow, and then a lot of other companies that were trying to model themselves after Axie. And I think it definitely put Vietnam on the map. But, you know, in the previous panel, Loy Lu from Kyber Network was here, and this probably gets overlooked, but, you know, in 2017, Kyber was able to raise more than $50 million through an ICO. And, you know, this kind of funding was almost unheard of. You were talking about in the 2010s. Yeah, I mean, the list of companies that were able to raise that amount of money was much smaller than now. And the fact that the crypto funding is growing on top of venture capital funding, I think is a really interesting trend for Vietnam, and, you know, something that Ben and Jeff are seeing firsthand.
And Jeff, I'm curious from your perspective, you know, before this panel, we were talking about the SaaS readiness of the enterprises here in Southeast Asia, but also Vietnam. What are you seeing from your perspective?
So the SaaS.
How, you know, basically a lot of the startups that are servicing the companies and enterprises here in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting dynamic, because serving companies locally requires a very different skill set than serving multinational corporations. So there still seems to be a divergence between the types of companies that get built and have local customers, and the types of companies that can get built and have international customers. And we've seen a lot more of the international SaaS stuff coming out of India, but there's no reason it anymore shouldn't be coming out of Vietnam, and, like, given the tech talent here.
So, you know, to double click on that, through your angel investing, what sort of those characteristics are you looking at for, you know, Web 2 or Web 3 startups, you know, when they're pitching to you?
Well, for one thing, they need to understand the industry they're going after better than I do, and they also have to have an advantage over the current incumbents. There has to be some reason for why there's something new that's going to take over today, and why the technology that the other people are using doesn't actually serve their purposes.
Ben, is that similar or different for when you are diligencing Web3 companies?
Yeah, we haven't invested after investing in Axie Infinity in any Web3 companies. And our investment in Axie went far back as like early 2019. So, and it wasn't clear what kind of company they were going to be. I mean, things were not clear at all. They only had 400 players. So we really just focused on the team and watched how they executed, because they worked out of our office for 4 months, watched how they thought about the community, thought about the mission, how they just continued to deliver product, actually code. I think that total commitment to their customer is always something we look for, and they had it in spades. I come across many different Web3 projects. Inherently, they have some fundamental flaws. Often, it's just vaporware, or they're not incentivized in terms of the vesting schedule, or it's just very shallow in thought. And so I think there's the big challenge being an investor in this region is because this country is full of builders and software engineers, and everyone has a side hustle and, alongside that, their day job. So that means there's an incredible amount of noise. There's an incredible amount of deals you have to sift through to actually get to someone who's actually in it to win it, completely dedicated to the mission, to building that product. So, yeah, I want to do more, but I'm waiting for the right deal to come along.
So Don, this is really interesting then. Let's kind of think about these founder characteristics, right? Your customers, when you work with them, are there any characteristics or traits that you see that maybe can predict some level of success? There are a lot of builders here in the audience. What are some things you're screening for?
Right. So I'm working with over 300 founders that are either VC backed or ICO backed. For Web3, the things that I'm looking for, typically the idea should have something to do with decentralization. If it's like kind of a Web2 idea where you tack on a token, that's probably not going to work. And a thoughtful white paper. And so this idea that you have to write a white paper before you do an ICO, IDO, for some people, if they treat it like homework, something that they're just going to copy someone else's and then put it up and then raise money, that's usually a bad sign. And if I literally have read this paper already because they copied it from many other people, that's a bad sign. The ones that are really thoughtfully written, where they're explaining the problem and how they're going to address it, and you actually learn something, those tend to be better projects that get traction and that end up being much more sustainable companies.
How about you, Jeff? You mentioned that you're really betting on founders, right? And maybe some of your Web3 investments have been really focused on the founder. What are you looking at when you are talking to these founders? Why invest in founder A versus a founder B?
Well, to be honest, I haven't done a Web3 investment in a founder I didn't already know prior to them deciding to start a company. And there are people that I decided if they're doing something else again, I'm backing them regardless. So yeah, well, what are some of those characteristics? Is it the grit? Is it the agility to pivot? How do you think about that? It's grit, it's the ability to sell, it's the ability to build, it's all these things, the ability to sell is not just to customers, but also to people to join them and join their projects and get a great team around them and to do something with a really good group of people.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. So, one thing we want to talk about also are some of the trends and perhaps some of the verticals that we're seeing that are investable, both in Web 2 and Web 3. Ben, as you're looking at all the deals you're currently doing, are there any specific verticals or sectors that get you very excited? Is it perhaps gaming? Is it education? Where are you seeing that specifically within a Southeast Asia perspective?
So Southeast Asia is slightly different from everywhere in the world. One of the big challenges over here is it's a very diverse region. 12 different languages and ethnicities and regulatory environments, so on and so forth. And so, VC is all about scale. And so the challenge for us is being able to find entrepreneurs who can build that scale across or solve problems across multiple markets. There's a few sectors that are just global, right? We've seen that with blockchain, we've seen that with gaming, even some consumer things such as K-pop or manga are quite global. I do think that, we just try to follow the innovation, and there's a part of that innovation trying to solve things like universal basic needs, the need for education and healthcare and access to finances and everything else. But in VC, there's a portion of innovation that looks a little crazy, that you can't really pattern match with, that is maybe what we call category makers, that change the way people behave and act, and there's not a customer yet for it. And that's something that we're always looking out for, something that's developed uniquely for emerging Asia. Because I do think there's a world where if you think about the product manager building these products in blockchain or Web3, is that person really going to know, that person from Silicon Valley or New York really going to know what the rising middle class Filipino or Vietnamese consumer really needs, or how they get onboarded, or how they get from fiat to crypto? They're probably not a good idea. And so I do think there's an opportunity for, you know, emerging Asia, for Southeast Asia to build these type of newer solutions specifically for its own backyard. So yeah, exciting whole new worlds in Web3 made for emerging Asia, and then kind of still solving very basic universal needs, because that technology disruption in this region, it's early, but inevitable, right? So I'm so excited because there's so much value to be created over the next 5-10 years through technology and all that adoption, even through down cycles. That next 5-10 years is going to be exciting.
And Don, what about you? I mean, you see so many founders from a infrastructure perspective here. What are some of the most exciting sectors or verticals you're seeing through from a usage perspective?
Right. So Ben mentioned something really interesting too. So he invested in Axie in 2019, and I actually saw the deck in 2019, and I had no idea what to make of it, because it seemed like a bunch of different, like there was NFTs, there was Ethereum, there were these Pokemon characters, and you built a business around it somehow. But you know, Ben was talking about category makers, and this really was a category maker, as where there have been over 200 clones that have modeled every single detail exactly like Axie. But if you were there in 2019, it's not clear most of you would have been able to catch this. And Ben somehow had the foresight to see this.
No foresight. Lucky.
Well, there were 400 users, but apparently they were very passionate and they were making YouTube videos.
Yeah, no, there's definitely like little proxies of like intense love for this product, intense need for this, I guess, the principle of owning your own assets. So that was something that was like, yeah, that stood out.
So the lesson I got there is, if I hear a pitch that I don't understand, be a little bit more patient and try to get to the heart of the matter. And so in terms of the business models I'm seeing a lot of right now, so obviously GameFi, if you're doing some sort of exchange, if you're doing a guild, if you're doing staking, you know, those kinds of models are being well covered, and I think I kind of understand them already. I'm actually looking for things I haven't heard before, and I'll get excited about that. So just something that would remind me of when I saw the Axie deck in 2019.
We did close a deal in June that's kind of exciting. It's a game development engine to help game developers tell stories. You know, there's this idea that storylines within games really improve the experience, and there's a way to be able to go and create an engine with primitives built for storytelling that I'm really excited about, and involves creation involving the community and then incentivized with tokens. So that's one thing I'm seeing as hopefully a new category maker.
How about you, Jeff? You know, what deals have you been seeing that, you know, you've been trying to really get allocation in? Are there specific themes or verticals that get you really excited in Southeast Asia?
Well, I like that there's been a broader shift recently away from the idea that all you need is GMV, and that you actually need to have something that's, at the end of the day, is profitable. Because the only way you know if there's actually product market fit is if people are willing to pay more money for something than it costs you to produce. And previously, with a lot of the fast e-commerce startups and stuff like that, these companies were burning tons of money on getting these to consumers that they were paying less than the company was paying just to get it to them, let alone adjusting for the customer acquisition costs or anything like that. So it's been interesting to see the rest of the market really come along that way and say, hey, we don't really want these companies that pump up GMV and burn tons of investor money. We want companies that are actually going to have real product market fit.
But if you think about that, it's a little bit of an evolution, right? You know, it came from, hey, we need EBITDA, right? Even before that, it was like, hey, we need something else before EBITDA. Now we need EBITDA. oh, now we need some profits. There's a multiple based on revenue. And then, oh, no, we just need GMV. And then now, oh, maybe not even GMV, we just need eyeballs, right? And there's a continuous trend towards maybe just attention, right?
Now, you don't necessarily need profit because if you have money and you can spend the money to grow and you can raise more money, but you need the potential for profit. So you need the gross margins, what you really need.
So if we were to sort of look at our crystal balls here and really think about, not only about the past and the current trends we're seeing in Web2 and Web3 in Southeast Asia, I love all of us to sort of put that prediction cap on. Where do we think the trends are going? And I want to put this in this backdrop of, one, we're sort of in a inflection point within the crypto markets where 6 months ago, it was a very different investment climate to what it is now. And you want to zoom out even further on what the global macro looks like and perhaps where we are in terms of printing money or recession. So would love to get the panelists here, and maybe we'll do it with Jeff first this time, and we'll invert it. But where do you think there are certain trends that you're seeing that you get excited about going forward?
Well, so the global macro situation is interesting, especially for Vietnam, because right now the U.S. Federal Reserve is way behind on inflation. They're going to need to hike a lot more, and the market is only starting to realize just how tight the monetary policy is going to need to be in order to control that. And historically, whenever the U.S. has tight monetary policy, the emerging markets suffer. And so in the medium and short term, Vietnam's markets will probably react to that to some degree, but the fundamentals of Vietnam are amazingly strong right now. They have everyone trying to get out of China, and there just isn't enough capacity even inside Vietnam. So there's going to be a ton of investment in Vietnam relative to the past, given those trends. And that is likely to support Vietnam's economy through this adjustment time period. So it'll be an interesting dynamic to see the global markets kind of crashing as Vietnam is still powering through.
Are we bullish on the VND then?
That really depends on what the government decides to do, and it's hard to know for sure what the government's going to decide there.
How about you, Don? What are some trends you're seeing when you're talking to emerging founders who perhaps have not gone a big AWS bill yet, but you foresee they will eventually?
I'm really jealous of the founders who are building startups now and are trying to raise capital. If you were trying to build a startup now versus 10 years ago, you've got a lot more venture capital funds to pitch to that have new capital, that have $50 million funds, like this guy here, that need to deploy capital. But you also have this route where you can raise money through crypto markets, through ICO, IDO. You can do one or the other. You can do both. I think that the Vietnam is kind of resistant in a lot of these other markets. So I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, there's one steady state that you can always bet on, is that technology gets built on other technology, and then new invention gets built on top of that. So things accelerate. And you look back and you're always saying, if you brought yourself back 10 years ago and started saying, hey, it's going to happen, things you see now happening with Dolly and stable diffusion, you'd be like, no way, absolutely, that's impossible. So that's one steady truth, is that 5-10 years from now, we're going to be looking back and say, oh my God, there's that future just looks so far away, it's impossible. So we're going to continue seeing that type of advancement, that kind of like non-linear explosion of innovation and growth. But what's interesting about this region is, this is the new emerging Asia after China and India. And if you go back, even further back, like emerging Asia has always built tremendous value, whether it's post-World War II Japan, South Korea, and then China, India, and then Southeast Asia. When looking through the lens of software, what we're starting to see that's relatively new, but I think is going to start increasing, is this idea that Asian software companies will be dominating their counterparts in the West. We started seeing that with TikTok in China, PUBG in South Korea, Freshworks coming out of India, Sky Mavis coming out of Vietnam. And so this is all somewhat recent trends, but it's an interesting and I think growing trend that's going to be marking the fact that, hey, this is the region that's going to produce a lot of innovation, and it's still very much in its early stages of doing that.
So, you know, as we wrap up this panel here, I really want this to be practical for everybody in the audience. And so, you know, I'd love for everyone here to sort of impart some wisdom or one thing if everyone got to get out of this, what would it be? And so, Jeff, maybe we'll start with you.
Whether you're building in Web2 or Web3 or other markets, is just to make sure that you really have product market fit and that your customers are actually using and liking your tool for the right reasons, not because they're burning money on it or because they're expecting price appreciation.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think one of the reasons Web3 founders have done so well in Vietnam is that they've actually found real pain points. You know, so stable coins can actually help you bypass capital controls and things like that. Think about actual pain points and just be asking yourself, what's a pain point that a customer will have that a decentralized platform can solve?
I guess for the entrepreneurs, you know, when I think back about my own entrepreneurial journey, I spent most of my life as an entrepreneur rather than an investor. The things I remember the most weren't the customers or the products or even, you know, the outcome. What lasted with me to today is basically all the relationships you build with your team and all those moments of having those ups and downs, trying to build something, trying to solve something. That'll last your lifetime. And then, you know, when you're old and in your deathbed, that's what you're gonna cherish the most. So enjoy the journey. Yeah, sure, build towards the destination, but enjoy that journey.
Well, there you have it, folks, from 3 of the best allocators out there. If we can have everyone give them a round of applause, please. Thank you, everybody.